Good afternoon, everyone. It's so great to be with you today, for joining the Future of Digital Education in a Post-COVID World, presented by Edmentum. The large-scale national experiment with universal digital K-12 education will require us to think through necessary changes to policy and practice. I'm honored to be here today with two experienced state school leaders, Superintendent of Public Instruction of Oklahoma, Joy Hofmeister, and Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kirsten Baesler of North Dakota. Joining us also is Chief Executive Officer of Edmentum, Jamie Post-Candee, who will share her perspective as a leader in the ed tech industry. So let's get started. Sorry, I just lost. Superintendent Baesler and Hofmeister, set the stage for us. As the key education leader in your state, how are you managing, first of all, and how are you guiding your LEAs as they respond to their educators, their students, and their families? Superintendent Hofmeister, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be together and talk about something that all states are going through. And in Oklahoma, we are also learning from one another. And I would just say that, you know, it is really a time where our districts are in a variety of modality for instruction, just like we see in lots of other places. The majority of our schools are in person with rolling quarantining that has impacted hundreds of students in one school at a time. So it is a time where we have needed to pivot, and we planned for that. Our districts have been really champions of trying to meet their kids where they are, and it's been one that comes with challenges, but we are grateful for the partnership that we have had for this instance with Exact Path with Edmentum, and are trying also to identify where those gaps are that our children have learning loss, and how we can best tailor a pathway to achieve where we know our kids need to be, but recognizing that that's going to look different for each student.
So I would say Superintendent Hofmeister definitely really did a wonderful job of saying, boy, there's so many different modalities out there. Our school districts are rolling through students in distance learning on all sorts of models. So on average, we have about 55% of our K through 12 students in a face-to-face learning environment on any given day. And so we have school districts that range in size from just under 15,000 students to some school districts that are as small as 14 students. And so how that distance learning model looks in each of those school districts is extremely different and extremely varied. And so for us, it's really a matter of how do we continually communicate? I would say communication, leadership, and that ongoing understanding that we need to evolve. We're learning more each day about the virus. We're learning more each day about the delivery instruction models, and we have to really understand and evolve on the go and adapt on the go in a way that we've never had to do before. I'd say elementary teachers have always been quite adaptable. Middle school teachers still. High school teachers, they struggle a little bit more, that moment to moment pivot on adaptability, but we're all getting better at that. So as we talk about leadership and how as a state are we helping, we are helping and assisting our local school district leaders, the families, the communities. I think by the mantra that we have here is, what is our first order business? That has to take priority. That changes not only day to day, but hour to hour. But through it all, it's, plan the work and work the plan. And so that plan is ever evolving, but you have to have a strategy. You have to have a plan. The planning helps, but then you absolutely have to remember to work the plan as well. And that plan needs to be different for the varying circumstances of our schools in the state.
Yeah, I can't even imagine having to scramble so quickly, so fast, and needing to be so nimble. So, Jamie, you represent the ed tech industry. There's a number of folks that are working, scrambling to support states and districts. So tell us what you're doing and how you are looking at not only the past, but the future of the situation.
Sure. Thank you, Lizzette. It's great to be here, and thank you for having me on this panel. For those of you that don't know Edmentum, we're actually celebrating our 60-year anniversary this year. So it's very exciting. We were originally Plato Learning. So we have 6 decades of doing this work. And as Superintendent Baesler just talked about, it's the adaptability aspect of what's happening right now. The beauty of what many education technology publishers do is the entire basis of what we provide and how we think about implementation and technical service to our SEA and our LEA partners is really about the adaptability of our various tools. And so at Edmentum, and of course it's very busy this year given the work that we do, we're serving just over 7 million students here in the United States. We're working with just over 2 million teachers. And we currently, through the virtual programs that we offer, have over 250,000 enrollments. And the way that we do the virtual programming is we partner with our LEA and our charter partners. We provide the curriculum, the instruction, all the things that you need to run a blended or a virtual program. And then we help build the capacity. So, I think about the last 10, 11 months as really 3 different phases. In spring, it was very chaotic, and we were just trying to figure out what we do to make it through the end of the year. So there were a lot of implementation support, webinars, just trying to get in and help provide whatever we can do as an education publishing community to our partners. Then over the summer, there was deep thought, deep planning, lots of conversations, really digging in and thinking about how do we expand capacity? How do we help you think about different models? Then we get into back to school, and it's been just this cycle of, opening, closing, and from our school leaders to our educators to our students and our families, people are tired, but people are working really, really hard to expand our thinking to be more adaptable as we think about these models moving forward. And when we were talking this morning about just prepping for today's conversation, when I think about innovation, if you look at what Superintendent Hofmeister and Baesler have done in this last, getting back to school period, there's a lot of innovation happening in Oklahoma and North Dakota that I think from a policymaking perspective, from an education leadership perspective, people should be paying attention to. And I hope as we get into the discussion today, you'll hear more about that, but it's thinking more broadly about who our constituents are and how we form adaptable systems that support the varying needs that you're going to have, little districts, big districts, accessibility challenges, so on and so forth. So I think this conversation will be a really good one for people to learn some best practices.
Well, let's jump into that innovation. There's all these, multi-modality teaching and learning going on, and I'm sure that the planning has shifted and changed over the months. So talk to us about that. Why don't you start, Superintendent Baesler? Just tell us what you're doing using, your brain power around innovation, as I know y'all are very innovative out there.
So thank you. I appreciate that. So, we were fortunate enough in the 2015 session, we're a biennial legislative session in North Dakota. So 80 days of legislative policy and appropriation for a 2-year period. So during the 2017 session, we passed a bipartisan bill that allowed the school districts in the state, public school districts in the state, to have the same autonomy, flexibility, and ability to act more like a charter school than a public school is normally given the autonomy to do. And we called it the Education Innovation Bill. And it simply required that school districts work with their teaching staff, their school board, their community, their parents, the students themselves, and develop a plan and break free from some of the confinements that public school expectations generally, or that state policy and even communities generally place on the traditional public school system. And so since that time, we had about a 5-year jump start on this, and we found clearly that those school districts that had submitted for that innovation education waiver had gone through that transition and begun the planning, the hard work that it takes to move to a more student-centered, proficiency, competency-based. They made that transition to distance learning this spring and the ongoing learning through the summer and into this fall. They made that transition much more quickly. Their communities were prepped for it. But in addition to that, we also had some front runners that are school districts that hadn't quite gotten as far as those school districts had gotten. They had their peers, they had mentors, they had people that were able to help them through the initial stages and get through. So without that 5 years of planning, if you will, I don't know that we would have been able to be as far as we have been. We are still really trying to find our way, the adaptability. We have, as I mentioned, we have some school districts that have a single math teacher for the entire 7th through 12th grade. And so they are doing 5 preps of math for their in-person learners and then 5 preps of math for their distance learners. We have some school districts that have been able to designate a team that is just solely in-person learning teachers in each subject area, and a team that is strictly, dedicated to the distance learning. And so that variety has allowed us to really provide some opportunity. The governor's executive order allows our school districts to be extremely flexible during this time, and a lot of lessons learned that we know will, not just hope, we know that this will help us, and we will not rebound, and we will, recover and reinvent at the same time. And so, but I would say, as I say that, I do want to move into some things that we're not doing well enough, and the writing is on the wall. And I hope that we can use this opportunity today to really talk about the crisis that this nation is facing because of this year for our students.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I want to give you your opportunity. I want both of y'all to also be able to speak to the idea of being 5 steps ahead when you're 20 steps behind, right? So Superintendent Hofmeister, give us, I know Oklahoma's been doing a lot of work innovatively. Would love to hear about what's going on there.
It is great to be able to have partners. A lot of the innovation comes with that network of partnerships, both private and public. And we have, just to kind of set a little bit of the stage, Oklahoma has over 700,000 students pre-K through 12th grade. We have over 540 districts. And pre-COVID, we had 200 of our schools with an existing online academy or a virtual opportunity for their students, albeit some of that might have been only for credit recovery or specific students, and not for maybe high school alone. But when we really stop and think about the opportunity for students to be able to have a tailor-made learning and the use of digital technology to deliver that there at all grade levels, that was something that was really impeded by connectivity. And so what we have been, I think, we've known it's been a lingering challenge, but certainly with COVID, we've all had to work through, not just in Oklahoma, I know, but that connectivity issue, the digital divide. And I don't want to rest until we have that solved. It's got to be as basic as a basic utility for every family. It's an investment in education, and I think it speaks to equity and that need, but also the way that impacts families and their ability to engage and know what is happening in their own children's education. So as we moved to a rapid change from in-person learning to suddenly full stop and a closure of all buildings in March, and having everyone take about a week, and during the spring break time and retool for a completely different delivery. There were some districts that were able to do the virtual instruction, but for the most part, many of the districts were caught without the infrastructure in place. And so it really highlighted for us both connectivity issues that we needed to address, and we did that through leveraging statewide contract and rates for internet and hotspots, et cetera. But then also, and by the way, that's a temporary fix. So that's got to be established permanently. But then also and this is something that I think that both North Dakota and Oklahoma have done as an example here today. We want to highlight this, that through leveraging a state rate, we were able to offer what we knew was coming for the fall, where everyone was talking about learning loss over the summer. And we already know that the summer learning slide is real, but it's further compounded by the impact of disruption to delivery, and teachers moved heaven and earth to connect with their students in the spring. But we all know that we were not advancing with the kind of learning that we would normally expect to start a school year with. Ending a school year with closures is very different than starting a brand new school year. And that called for a different response. So we did endeavor to use some of our CARES Relief Act funds to have a way for everyone universally to have this opportunity of digital learning, no matter how they wanted to use that. And most of them knew that they weren't going to be able to anticipate. They needed to just be ready for different modality. The unexpected part, as I alluded to earlier, was what the quarantining disruption was going to mean, as most of our schools tried to open in person. And so they were using some of their time to even have a day where they did all virtual, but while they were in school, or all virtual at home on one day a week, as they got ready for what they expected, which would be a broad closure due to not having teachers to fill those areas because we are out of subs, or teachers are in quarantine, or there aren't bus drivers to transport kids in. So technology was part of how we were going to keep continuity going, try to make gains, close gaps, and also really continue to move towards something that we know this pandemic can serve as a pull start for everyone, having that introduction to virtual learning that we hope will be something that lasts after the pandemic, and is a way for our families to be engaged in new ways. And we are certainly seeing that as one of the outcomes of being in distance learning for some time, at least in the year.
So Jamie, here you have two state leaders that have been scrambling to do everything they can to get the services they need to their students and families. And as a representative of the ed tech industry, what is the responsibility of the industry as a whole to best support our country, knowing that there's going to be competition, people are going to be shooting for different, RFPs, trying to get the work done, but what is the corporate responsibility that ed tech needs to bring into play to best support leaders like these?
So the first part of it is, the way that most technology organizations work is you build something and then you hope, you put it out there and you hope that the students and teachers benefit from it. And that when you look at what each state needs, and even though there are a lot of similarities between Oklahoma and North Dakota as an example here, there are many differences, right? There's differences in constituents and what the students need, a lot of different factors. And so one of the most important things we can do as an industry, that public-private partnership that we talked about earlier, is to really understand the state's challenges, strategy, what is working and not working, and then how do we modify what we do to make sure that we're serving the needs of all students in that state. And so I'll give you an example of that. At Edmentum, it's been a fascinating 10 months in that historically we have always done a lot of work with teachers, directly with educators and school-based leadership, as well as district administrators. To a lesser degree at the state level, though, that has grown quite a bit here in the last year, and we're really grateful for that. But one of the things that is very new to us that we have had to adapt greatly in the last 6-8 months has been with parents. And so the understanding now that families have of their child's instructional day, like what actually happens, because many of us, I've got 2 elementary kids, like we're part-time teachers right now helping, the school systems go through the instructional day for our kids who are in purely remote or even in hybrid. And so our role in ed tech is to not just understand the trends of what's happening, but also to adapt as fast as we possibly can, right? So it's hearing what's happening, it's understanding the shifts that are happening. It's not trying to force, whatever our strategy or vision was for what we were going to do for kids and teachers. It's adapting to make sure you shouldn't see us. We should just be out of the way. We are an enabler of great teaching and learning, right? We are not the teacher. We are the enabler. We empower, we amplify the teaching and the learning. So we, as a ed tech community, and we've talked a lot about this as companies have come together, and I do think that's a really good thing that has happened out of this pandemic. There's so many awful things, but one of the really good things is our SEAs, our LEAs, our charter partners expect us to work together, right? We have to learn to work together, and I call it co-opetition, where there could be things that we do that are, competitive, but in an effort to best serve kids and teachers, and you've seen a lot more of this from the pandemic, and I think that's going to continue, and we should expect it to continue, is how do the education technology companies come together and find ways to make it easier, more streamlined, more interoperable for our LEAs, for our teachers, and for our families, for the parents, to seamlessly use these tools for the best outcomes for our kids. So those are some of the things that we've been seeing, but I think the industry should have an expectation that the organizations work very closely together, because there's absolutely ways to do that. And we're proving it right now through this pandemic. And that is something that needs to be an expectation on the other side of this as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's get into, this is an opportunity to really share your stories in your states. And so, as state chiefs, I'm sure that, you're always getting great ideas and solutions that will tackle the problems that as they come. But there's that sticky little issue of operationalization, right? Which means that you're making very hard decisions very quickly. But will they actually work for the SEA to implement? Or are there other folks that can help in that supporting role? Because schools have become the community hubs, right? Y'all fed kids. Y'all connected in the hotspots. I mean, all of a sudden the school became where everybody came together. So I'd love for y'all to describe your challenges, how you ensured that they worked for your agency, or if they didn't, what did you have to do to shift? And then what should other states be thinking about, policymakers thinking about as we move forward through this? Because, I've got 3 kids. They're all home this week because they wanted to give it a little 5-day Thanksgiving break because of all the travel. So we're not gonna. It's not gonna change anytime soon. So would love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
So that is, I'll start if I can, Lizzette, because that is exactly right. So one of the things, K-12 education is a complex ecosystem in and of itself. I mean, we are dealing with pre-K, we're dealing with the science of reading, we're talking about special education, we're talking about diversity, we're talking about equity, we're talking about opportunity, we're talking about access, we're talking about CTE, we're talking about IB. I mean, when you talk about all the list of things that is contained within K-12 education systems, the complexity of that ecosystem is incredible. You suddenly add in the public health system, the entire weight of the public health, and you're dealing with a vernacular and agencies that operate in a completely different way, and you're partnering with the Department of Emergency Services in your state and the Department of Health officer. You're meeting with them on a daily basis, if not a thrice daily basis, and you bring in the ecosystem of a entirely different medical world, along with emergency response and operation, with a system that's already that complex. That has been the most challenging, and that is leadership, but it's also, what does that mean as a state agency, and what do you as a leader need to do? The first thing that I think you need to do is you need to partner with those people and collaborate, but you also need to know what your swim lane is, what your area of expertise is, and you need to say, on this mission, you are going to be the Batman, I'm going to be the Batgirl. On this mission, I know education, I'm going to step in, I'm the Batman, and you're going to need to be the Robin on this one. And so you really have to partner and collaborate, but you also need to respect each other's expertise and not try to do more. Educators tend to want to take the world upon their shoulders and do it all. And sometimes the world expects that we take the world upon our shoulders and do it all. So you have to be humble, and you have to be smart that you don't know it all. And so that's the first thing, and that I would say. And so when our area of expertise is teaching and learning and instruction and child growth and development, let's make sure that we are leaders in that and stay 5 steps ahead. It is imperative that we stay 5 steps ahead of what the next big issue is going to be. We need to see it coming before our local administrators even know it exists. And then how are we going to plan for that? And, you know, that's how I saw this ed tech. Fortunately, North Dakota did not have the connectivity issue. When we did an analysis, when we knew we were going to have to shut down our school buildings to learning, we did an analysis of each of our students' homes. We had a lot of the right things in place, and we found out that 80% of our students K-12 had broadband, high-speed internet connectivity in their home. So we set about how do we get the other 20%. So we cross-checked our students' home addresses with our local providers of broadband internet. We found out, you know, where those children were living, where those students were living, and we got the connectivity to their house. We had lots of infrastructure there that was available. So by mid-April, over 99% of our students had connectivity. Our governor and as the state superintendent, we didn't allow our schools, we didn't allow our K-12 system to shut down. So April and May, April and May and into June, we had learning. They finished out their school year. So we had a lot of lessons learned. But what we saw there is that even with that heroic effort, in mid-June, I saw this nation is on the verge of a crisis. It is a national crisis. And so normally, state education agencies don't get into the business of purchasing statewide contracts like Oklahoma and North Dakota did to provide curriculum or instruction or PD. But we viewed ourselves as the Red Cross. At this point in time, we needed to be the Red Cross of teaching and learning. Just like the Red Cross brings in blankets and cots and water bottles to the local leaders when they are dealing with the disaster, we needed to bring in the tools for science, math, reading, math, and writing to our teachers, to our schools, to our students. But we also learned from the April, May, June experience that, as you said, Lizzette, that parents, families, whether auntie or uncle or grandma or grandpa or older brother or sister, they were acting as the quasi-teachers, the quasi-instructors. What we heard from them is, please don't bounce us around from platform to platform. We have so many logins. Give us something that is efficient and easy. So we went in search of that and provided that. Even with that, when we did our fall assessment, we have the results back, 1 in 4 of our students that were on grade level in math, reading, and writing are now below grade level. So even with that, even with enormously orchestrated efforts, we have thousands of children that we don't know where they're at. We are in the middle of a national crisis right now. And I feel at times, even when I'm there with my partners, that I'm the sole voice in the forest screaming in that nightmare that that reoccurring dream that we have. And although we say we value 0 to 18-year-olds in this nation, I'm not convinced we really do. But the final thing that I want to say is JAMA just published a study, a modeling, as we talk about the importance of getting our students back in school in face-to-face learning. There's often the conversation about the loss of life that we're risking if we do that. JAMA did a modeling that determined that 5.53 million years of life have now just been lost to this generation of 3 to 18-year-olds because of the loss of educational opportunities based on 1 year. So we need to continue to act as leaders, be 5 steps ahead, continue to act until this is over, to do our part to crush the curve, but to also ensure that the teaching and learning is available to our families. The professional development is there for our teachers to do. We didn't prepare them to suddenly do a distance learning, and we have to provide them the resources until we can help them tool themselves up. So that's how collaboration, knowing what our role is, being humble, and making sure that we are the Red Cross of teaching and learning as the experts until we can get back to normal, which I hope is reinvented.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Superintendent Hofmeister?
I love all that Kirsten said. And I think we're also examining, what is our role? How can we be the most supportive of our school districts? We want our districts to, and they want autonomy. They want to be able to make choices. So part of how we made the choices that we did were twofold. One was, first, what are our districts already interested in, invested in, using? And then when we look at quality and a quality index and alignment to academic standards that will prepare our students for college career readiness, we also feel that was how we made our decision with our digital learning tools. But we also have looked at what's our future role? And I feel like there is where we maybe aren't, as state education agencies, looking yet. We are still in the crisis. We're still talking about quarantining and following various regulations, et cetera, related to operations of schools. But there's also more we do as a state agency to borrow Kirsten's 5 steps ahead approach. And it really has more to do now with, if we want to see this kind of, and I think we will still need it, there's not going to be an option. We want our kids to have that digital opportunity. Our teachers are going to need to use these various modality and the flexibility. But we also want to help our districts discern between the various emails they get and the solicitations and all of those types of bombardment of information, and to discern and filter through that. We are looking at a more tiered approach, asking as we move forward for various vendors to provide their information. We want to do studies with researchers on alignment, and as Kirsten mentioned, and I think actually maybe Jamie even, the science of reading. We want to see the kind of quality with our platforms, with the tools that we're going to be investing in, either at a district level or at a state level in the future. And so that's coming. The other thing is we've built in Oklahoma a network of learning of districts in our initial cohort that we began this summer in the beginning of the fall, of districts that are working together to learn best practices as they are different sizes, different locations, demographics, from one another. So that they can grow and build upon these lessons and opportunities that we have with the CARES Act dollars that are here. But our eye is on how do we stretch this into the future and do this in a high quality way instead of a scattershot approach where there are varying degrees of quality. And then this also makes me think about the preparedness of those teachers that are already in the pipeline and coming out of our schools of education and into classrooms. Of course, a lot of them had a leg up on some of our teachers that had been in the field teaching in an in-person classroom and really hadn't experienced digital learning as a student in college or as a teacher in a classroom. But we really do need to continue the idea of thinking about the full spectrum, that arc of preparedness to practice, where we see our teachers that are coming either out of field and are emergency certified in Oklahoma. Unfortunately, we have a teacher shortage, and we are seeing those teachers come out of field into classrooms. So they need to be trained. They need to have the kind of professional development support as well as those in schools of education. So we've also renamed and repurposed a teacher shortage task force to now one that is educator quality and diversity advisory. And part of their work is on the equitable services, the training, the preparedness for teachers in that pipeline into classrooms, and how their readiness and ability to connect with students will ultimately lead to greater equity for students. And I think that this is giving us an opportunity as we think about school redesign. How do we spend the time we have? Of course, the pandemic has taught us a lot about what are we doing with all of our time when we are together in one place, when our children may spend only 2 hours on actual assignments in distance learning, or depending on the age, of course. But I think that this is a time also for some philosophical reflection and discussion about what will school look like in the future. What are those things that have allowed our parents to be more engaged, our families to be more engaged? What parts do we really need to improve on? And I think that some of that I've addressed with the need for understanding quality and alignment, and then and just really what will we do in terms of a commitment financially, the investment, to be able to still do this? Because, for example, when we have a district that, and for Oklahoma, we're among some of the lowest funding per student. You have one delivery model, let's say in person, and you can do that efficiently, and we have learned to do that. When you have in person, a hybrid, and online, now that's 3 times as expensive. And the shifting back and forth adds to that cost as well. And these are times that we have to be able to also articulate to those that represent us at the federal level that are considering relief on why and we need that support, and what that will also mean at a state level in the future going forward to be able to sustain this model as well.
Yeah. So while I know that we brought up a lot of the challenges, Jamie, I think one thing I did hear from both superintendents is their optimism. Like, I was thinking about a word cloud, and it would be innovation, reimagination, opportunities, right? This is really a time for us. As you said, normal is, do we really want to go back to normal, right? Do we want to go back to that old way of doing things? So again, being the innovators that you are, how do you see your role in helping our state leaders, our state education leaders, like, go that next mile?
I think one of the most important things that we do in the industry is we see the models that work, and oftentimes they're the ones you don't hear about in USA Today. And, it's a district in Oklahoma that's doing something really innovative at scale. And so I think as we think about school redesign and system redesign and how that influences and impacts a policy agenda, which is really, really important, we start talking about seat time versus competency-based education and what our families going to expect for their younger learners. We know that little kids for the most part, need to be in school. There's a caregiving aspect to what happens in K through 3, but there's so many things that are happening right now in terms of how you think about foundational skill development and how education technology tools, high quality, which is a very important point, can help there. And then as you move upstream, you are seeing, so think of the Starbucks model of a school, right? And so from middle school through high school, kids have now been exposed to very different learning modalities through this. And we're hearing a ton of feedback. And I can list you hundreds and hundreds of districts that have very, very cool models, and charter schools that have very cool models that are similar to, kids feel like they're at a Starbucks. The way you learn is different. You're moving right through kind of a differentiated instructional model. And so we have all of these best practices. We see them. They're not at scale yet. We need to have conversations, sit down and partner with our SEA partners to talk about what we see working, why we think it works, give them enough information so they can then take that to the policy level, both at the state and the federal level, right? That's going to drive some of the funding formula changes and the different things that we're going to have to work on over the next couple of years. But I think what's important is, right now, if you look at the media, it's an awful lot on what's not working. And there are serious challenges. There's millions of kids we can't find right now. There's accessibility, there's infrastructure issues, but we also have to learn from the models that are working. Right? And when we think of our consumer, it's our student. And the older the student gets, the more agency they have, independence they have, and the more they're going to demand from coming out of this pandemic because of the different exposures they've had to what school can look like. And so I want to make sure, whether it's Edmentum or many of the other organizations that are doing this work, that how do we come together and really focus on, let's take all the models of implementation and system redesign that have worked really well, and how do we create kind of a national platform that gives us the ability to talk about high quality implementation, school redesign at scale. And that'll drive policy conversations, funding conversations, and give us a lot of best practices as we move this forward. And I think there's been some really hard days. Back to school was, I think, the hardest in my career of doing this. I was a teacher, went into education publishing and then education technology, and all my years of doing this back to school season, I think we can all agree on the line here that it's probably the hardest of any of our careers. But boy, there have been every day, all of the hard things stack up, and then you see something, this is brilliance, right, of a whole school system, evolving and parents being engaged and just really cool outcomes happening from this and new models and best practices emerging. And that's pretty exciting. And so I think it's now harnessing the strong, good best practices that are working, bringing us together on a national platform, underpinning that with the importance of quality and and I 100% agree, we have to measure quality and make sure that we're doing right by our kids and teachers, and then moving forward with leveraging those models that are going to work for us in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of as we kind of move along through this, I would love to hear from y'all, so what's next? What are your next policy steps? What are your next, what keeps you up at night? Not what's keeping you up right now, because we know you're staying up all night right now. But as you think about getting through this school year, what is going to really push forward your states individually going into 2021, 2022? And what do you see as possible solutions? Is it funding? We know that federal funding will probably come through, but is it sustainable? How do you make these reforms sustainable and continue to move forward? Either one of y'all, go ahead.
So that's what keeps me up at night. It's what's kept me up at night for the last 7 years, Lizzette. I think, to just reframe the question that you asked, Jamie, what should we be expecting from our industry for the next steps to harness this? What do we need to do? That same question should be asked of all of the SEA leaders. I would say that, this has been the passion of reinventing education is what I ran for election for in 2012 and what I continue to run because that job isn't done. That work isn't done. Our students deserve to learn the way that they best learn and the way that that will best serve them. And Jamie outlined that very well. I mean, they've been exposed to it now. They know it. And many were in our nation before that. We've now accelerated that and we've ripped the Band-Aid off of the way that we used to do things. But what I've learned again through this is that the last 8 years that I've been in office, our teaching and learning, the instructional side of this innovation has made some great gains, and they've made some even stronger leaps ahead during this pandemic, the instruction, teaching and learning side. But what continues to be a barrier again and again, even those school districts, those bright shining stars that Jamie talked about that are in Oklahoma and in North Dakota and all across the nation, where they've made that leap forward, the two issues that remain are the way that we measure our students' learning, the way that we measure quality of schools, and the way that we fund the model. And each of those issues, both of those issues are extremely challenging. I was in the session yesterday where we talked about it's time for us to end seat time funding. But as a policymaker, both Joy and I are elected. And so we understand the door knocking. We understand those forums as we're running for reelection of the taxpayers' return on investment and their understanding of the investment of K-12 dollars. And so how do we usher reassure our taxpayers who are investing billions of dollars that they are actually getting what they are paying for when it comes to the teaching and learning within their K-12 districts. So, and we have yet to figure out a way that doesn't take an exorbitant amount of development of teacher build and governance models that school boards who are elected themselves understand, that legislators understand. When you say, okay, we're building a different system here, and they have been conditioned year after year to say, show me the NAEP scores, which are important, very important, but we also have to show, and we want to talk to you about what these students are able to do in the world that they will be grown-ups in. And so that funding and assessment are two significant hurdles that aren't as far in its innovation as the instructional side of reframing and reinventing and reforming education. And so, and I think it's because that the funding and assessment cannot happen in absence of the instructional side, but it is not simple. And I keep waiting for that plan, or that, oh yeah, this is the funding formula that this state figured out. And it just simply isn't there because it is so tied to taxpayer, ROI, assurance of the way that our teachers are being supported to teach, and the way that our students are needing to learn. So that we need to find out a way to fund. And I think the funding formula is going to be hinged on the way that we're measuring learning differently and measuring quality of teaching differently.
Sure.
So that's what keeps me up at night.
Superintendent Hofmeister, I mean, Oklahoma, as you know, has a very low per student funding and also low teacher salaries. So just, riffing off of your colleague here, Superintendent Baesler, would love to hear your thoughts. Again, how you plan on moving forward into 2021, 2022.
So I think that that's summed up with the approach. There's going to be a lot of different tools, but the approach is whole school, whole community, whole child. And as we think about the collective impact of our community engagement, our school engagement, and the meeting those needs of children in a multi-tiered system of support that are integrated, recognizing that we used to do school much more segmented. And I think during the pandemic, it has highlighted that our kids need to eat. We can't learn if we're hungry. We immediately had to go into those efforts to feed our children outside of school buildings, and then the social emotional aspect of this. None of that can be taken out of the equation. And so for us in Oklahoma, we are thinking about even I've heard it said, there's a collective trauma across the nation for children with the disconnect of not being together in person, not being with peers, and disruption. We know there's also a likelihood of higher levels of abuse and neglect that are going on in homes right now that are not seen. They're not, children aren't under the watchful eye of a teacher in person often in some of our states and in some of our communities, even here in Oklahoma. And it is the teacher that is often the first to report suspicion of abuse. We saw the year over year, and I want to give this example because I want to underscore how important it is to be together and to continue to find a way to connect. But our state Department of Human Services told us, DHS office told us that in April of 2019, there were 767 incidents of reported suspicion of abuse from teachers to the Department of Human Services. And in April of 2020, right in the throes of the pandemic start here in Oklahoma and across the nation, we only had 57 reports. That's a huge difference. And yet we know that there were more emergency room visits with more severe injuries to kids. So we can't separate out and talk about learning and innovation and modality and look at it only in a one-dimensional way. So when we have these discussions, it's real important from where I sit, and I know this is a collective discussion among state education chiefs, and Kirsten is a partner in this work as well. We are more and more talking about the whole child. And in order to support that whole child, we're going to need the whole community engaged around that. And it's about relationships. So we can talk technology all day long, but we have to do this as a way to use technology to connect, and then use technology and be innovative in how we personalize and individualize the path to progress. So we want our kids to be involved with learning where they feel it's relevant to where they're going, and that it answers what they need, and that they feel that continuum of how what they are doing today impacts what they need to be ready for tomorrow. And as in Oklahoma, we're really pushing that individual career academic planning as a process. And we've actually started that in pre-K. And it is a very well-defined engagement piece that is going to be part of a family around learning. And we want to use technology to assist with that. So we see all of these things working together. The teaching, the learning, and the engagement is what we're after. And that is then what will produce those higher outcomes that we seek. So we can reach our state goals. We have an 8-year plan with 6 very specific measurable goals. But I also think the last thing I'll say here is just that we can use these kinds of platforms that we've been talking about today that are assisting in our learning during a pandemic and virtually online, to be able to not only close equity gaps of not having that teacher that teaches, let's say, AP, but an online course is going to be able to provide that to a student in rural Oklahoma that needs it. We also, though, can use these kinds of opportunities to actually have a truing of expectation and where we think our children are and where they really are with that readiness. And that aspect is part of keeping parents and families engaged and children engaged in their own progress. And so when we have that independent learning, we build kids who are ready for the future. And so this is all part of that larger picture as we think about outcomes, raising kids who are digital learners that are ready for their next steps in learning and ready for life.
Well, and I wish I had brought up this, we're about almost near time, but you brought up some really great issues about families and family engagement and keeping that connectivity, because yes, I know what you're talking about, you know, being a mom, 3 kids. So that is something, obviously, as I said, schools have become these center points of community. But again, technology can also leverage, as Superintendent Hofmeister referred, to really keeping that connection as best as you can. So just in closing, Jamie, what do you think, you know, again, where is the ed tech industry's responsibility in ensuring that families have that connection when it is so like in a distance environment, right? How are you going to help your states there?
I think, you know, it's interesting. So the ed tech community has had tools available to support, you know, communication to parents, to be able to extend the capabilities into the home. But until this pandemic, there were pockets of how we would do that, and it was very much a school choice decision, right? It was very much left up to building leadership and, quite frankly, the classroom teachers, whether or not you wanted that to happen. And now we've opened up, right? The parents now deeply understand. So, like I said, I was a former teacher, and now as a parent watching my kids and just watching, classrooms have changed a lot over the years, but they haven't changed that much since I was in the classroom. And I think a lot of us at Edmentum talk about that. But what parents are seeing now is a real detailed exposure to what happens, and that is not going to go away. And I'll give you an example. We get millions of calls into our support center for all sorts of help and questions throughout the year, and typically 10% of them come from parents, typically those kids that are in our virtual programs that we partner with the SEAs and LEAs on. It's right now almost 40% of our calls, parents calling saying, how do I do this? And if I wanted to ask my child's teacher something about this, right? So we're just inundated with parent, I should say parent and guardian family calls around, deep engagement with expectations they have of our products, which is good, and questions around how they can be more involved in learning. So now the responsibility for us is to make sure that, one, we allow that to happen in a really authentic, meaningful, high quality way, because we have all the capability tools. We can extend all of this technology into the home. But two, we have to do it in partnership with our school, our district, and our SCA partners, because it has to be a partnership, right? I can't be off with my products, having parents do one thing and the classroom teacher not knowing what's happening. So now we have a responsibility to make sure that our school partners understand what families are going to expect moving forward, and that we create that continuity that we talked about earlier that also has to happen into the home. And so there's going to be a heightened responsibility of providers like Edmentum and others to understand how to bridge the communication between school and home, because we are the conduit. We're sitting in between all of it, and we can't be going in one direction and not have it support the district instructional or the SEA strategies moving forward. We've got to engage the families, but we've got to do it in a way that also keeps the relationship between the school and the home intact. And we're just the enabler of making sure that communication and that high quality learning happens continuously and with continuity as we move forward. So that's what I think we need to be doing.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I respond to that for just a second as Jamie sets forth on that work?
Yes.
So Jamie, you probably know that is an extremely important part of my last 4 years in office, and I created a family cabinet that we met quarterly prior to pandemic, and during the throes of it, we met weekly. One of the things that I've learned is you talked about communication. What that cabinet, and again, I'm so glad that we're using the word families and not parent, because when you say parent, that in my highly Native American state, that eliminates the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents that are raising. So they've told me that it eliminates, when they see a letter home to parents, they don't know if it really means them as the auntie or if it really means them as the grandma. And so using family is an important piece, but also as we talk about, as you work with your colleagues in the ed tech industry on that, please remember that communication is not schools spewing out, but an equal opportunity to have it. Communication really in its truest sense is something being spoken, something being understood and received, and vice versa. And so we are really good at communicating as K-12. We're really not good at engaging families. When we get good at engaging families, we're also really good at engaging those that are likely to be engaged, and really terrible at those that aren't engaged. And so some things that we've tried to do and that we are growing and we're hoping more of our partners do is, the question of, so what'd you do at school today, or what'd you do in class today, whether it be online or in person? Nothing. If those texts could go out using the broadcast, the definite broadcast, we learned about dinosaurs today, or we learned about, double-digit multiplication. Can you ask your child these three, what's 3 times 4 or 40 times 20? And can you tell me if they got 3 right? Or how many, if they got 3 right, 2 right, or 1 right? It gives that unengaged parent that maybe doesn't feel smart about math 3 things that they can ask, and with the answers. And then there's that conversation that happens between the provider, teacher, whoever, and that potentially disengaged parent. Those are things that I heard from the family cabinet that I wish that I would have known 31 years ago when I was still in the classroom. And so just snippets of really digestible information of specific things. We learned double digit. Can you try these 3 things out? Gives feedback to that teacher to say, oh, I'm going to work with Johnny tomorrow because his grandma or his auntie told me that he got 2 and he didn't get this one. So we're going to work on that again tomorrow. So that some things that we think we do communication and engagement well. And if we would have done it, had it figured out, we'd have probably been doing it all already. So that's
Very good point.
an important piece to me.
Yep, very good
I
point.
love that. I love that, Kirsten. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great way for us to close out. Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be able to facilitate this conversation with y'all. I continue to be in awe of the work that y'all do every day, and the commitment that you are making to your students and families, all of y'all. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of conference.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.